If your scalp feels greasy, itchy, flaky, and your hair seems thinner, no matter what you try, you may be focusing on the wrong problem. Because sometimes the issue is not just hair loss. Sometimes the problem is that the scalp itself has become a bad environment for hair to emerge. And one of the most overlooked reasons for that is hardened sebum buildup. Now, I know that sounds simple, maybe even too simple, but stay with me because this can be a major missing piece. I'm talking about thickened scalp oils mixed with dead skin, product residue, inflammation, microbial imbalance, and oxidation, building up around the follicle openings and creating what is basically a clogged, irritated surface. And if the follicle opening is congested, inflamed, and buried under a compacted layer of debris, how do you expect healthy new hair to come through properly? That's the part most people miss. They're trying to stimulate growth while ignoring the terrain the hair has to grow through. It's like watering a plant while the soil is packed like concrete. You can have the right nutrients, the right hormones, and even a living root system underneath. But if the surface is hardened, suffocating, and inflamed, growth gets weaker, slower, and less efficient. So in this video, I want to show you what hardened scalp oil really is, why it happens, why it can interfere with healthy hair emergence, and most importantly, what you can do naturally and strategically to clear that scalp environment without making things worse. Because a lot of people are damaging their scalp in the name of fixing it. And that's exactly what you don't want to do. Let's start with the basics. Sebum is not the enemy. Sebum is your body's natural protective oil. Your scalp is supposed to make it. It helps lubricate the skin, reduce water loss, protect the barrier, and keep hair from becoming dry and fragile. So oil itself is not the problem. The problem starts when that oil becomes excessive, stagnant, thick, oxidized, inflamed, or unable to flow properly out of the follicle opening. That's when sebum stops acting like a healthy protective coating and starts acting like a trap. Over time, scalp oil can mix with dead skin cells, sweat minerals, dust, pollution, styling products, silicones, waxes, dry shampoo residue, and microbes that naturally live on the scalp. Then it can compact, harden, and form a waxy layer or even tiny plugs around the follicles. Some people describe it as a greasy crust. Some say their scalp feels like it has grit or sand. Some notice little white or yellowish residue under their nails when they scratch. Some say the scalp feels oily and dry at the same time. That combination is a big clue. And if that sounds familiar, you're not crazy. That is a real scalp pattern, and it often shows up in people who are dealing with thinning, excessive shedding, poor hair texture, scalp tenderness, itchiness, and a general feeling that the scalp is just not healthy. Now, here's the important thing. Hardened sebum is usually not the only cause of hair thinning. I want to be very clear about that. If you have androgen sensitivity, nutrient deficiencies, chronic stress, thyroid issues, insulin resistance, post-illness, shedding, or inflammatory scalp conditions, those things matter too, but hardened sebum can absolutely become a major barrier on top of those problems. So even if you're working on hormones or nutrition, If the scalp surface itself is congested and inflamed, you may still be slowing down your progress. That's why this matters. Now, let's talk about why this buildup happens in the first place. The first reason is excess sebum production. This can happen for a lot of reasons. Hormones are one of the biggest. In particular, androgens like DHT can stimulate the sebaceous glands in susceptible people. That doesn't mean everyone with an oily scalp has too much testosterone. It means the scalp can be more sensitive to androgen activity, especially in certain areas like the crown, temples, and frontal scalp. That's why a lot of people with pattern thinning also notice oily roots, greasy buildup, or scalp congestion in those exact same areas. The second reason is poor scalp turnover. Your scalp is constantly renewing itself. Old skin cells are supposed to shed and release normally. But if that process becomes dysfunctional, those dead cells don't come off cleanly. Instead, they stick to the scalp, mix with sebum, and begin forming a compacted layer. And once that layer starts building, it becomes easier for more oil, more debris, and more inflammation to collect there. That's where things get messy. The third reason is oxidation and inflammation. This is a very big deal. Sebum can oxidize. In other words, it can become chemically altered by inflammation, environmental stress, and poor metabolic health. When that happens, the oil becomes more irritating to the skin. So it's not just that there's too much oil, it's that the oil itself can become more inflammatory and more likely to clog the scalp. This is one reason why diet matters so much, more than people realize. If someone is consuming a lot of ultra-processed foods, refined sugar, industrial seed oils, and inflammatory junk, while also running high stress and unstable blood sugar, the quality of the sebum often gets worse. And the scalp reflects that. The fourth reason is microbial imbalance. Your scalp has a microbiome. That means it has a community of microorganisms living on it, and when that ecosystem is balanced, it can actually support skin health. But when sebum builds up and dead skin accumulates, certain microbes can overgrow, especially Malassezia, which is a yeast commonly associated with dandruff, itch, flakes, and inflammation. Now, this is where people get confused. They think they have dry scalp because they see flakes. But a lot of the time, it's not dry scalp at all. It's oily, inflamed, congested scalp with abnormal shedding. Very different problem. And if you treat oily, inflammatory scalp like simple dryness, you often make it worse by adding more heavy oils and coatings without clearing the underlying congestion. The fifth reason is poor circulation and scalp tension. This one gets ignored way too often. If the scalp tissue is tight, stiff, immobile, or chronically inflamed, you can end up with a sluggish environment. Less tissue, mobility, less efficient circulation, poorer oxygen delivery, and slower waste removal. Again, this is not the sole cause of thinning, but it absolutely contributes to a scalp environment that does not favor robust hair emergence. Many people with chronic thinning describe the scalp as tight, sore, or tender. That's not something to ignore. Now let's talk about what this buildup can actually do to the follicle. Number one, it can obstruct the follicle opening. If a hair is trying to emerge through a congested, compacted opening, that's not ideal. It may come through weaker, thinner, slower, or more distorted. Number 2, it creates chronic, local inflammation. Oxidized sebum and microbial overgrowth can irritate the scalp and trigger an immune response. That means more itching, more redness, more sensitivity, and more inflammatory stress around the follicle. And hair follicles do not thrive in chronic inflammation. Number 3, it can trap miniaturized hairs. This is something a lot of people notice but don't understand. They may see tiny, fine hairs that never seem to mature. They appear, but they don't really develop. They stay weak, wispy, and stuck in a cycle. If the scalp opening is inflamed and congested, those fragile hairs are at an even bigger disadvantage. Number 4, it can keep you in a loop where the scalp never fully resets. More buildup leads to more inflammation. More inflammation alters oil production. More altered oil leads to more buildup. And the cycle just keeps feeding itself. So what's the solution? You need to soften the buildup, loosen it, clear it, calm the inflammation, and restore a healthier scalp environment. But you have to do that intelligently, because one of the biggest mistakes people make is getting aggressive. They start scratching the scalp with their nails. They use rough scalp brushes. They do harsh salt scrubs, sugar scrubs, or abrasive exfoliants. They over shampoo. They use strong detergents every day. They try to scrape the scalp clean, and what happens? They damage the skin barrier, create micro irritation, trigger more oil rebound, and make the scalp even more inflamed. So the goal is not war. The goal is restoration. You want to remove the blockage without injuring the terrain. That's the mindset shift. Let me walk you through a much better strategy. The first step is pre-softening the hardened sebum before washing. This is incredibly helpful, and most people skip it. If you try to remove compacted scalp buildup without first softening it, you're much more likely to either leave it behind or irritate the scalp trying to get it off. One of the simplest ways to do this is with a very light pre-wash scalp treatment. A few drops of jojoba oil can work well because jojoba is structurally similar to the scalp's natural sebum. It can help dissolve and soften hardened oil without being as heavy or occlusive as thicker oils. You can also use a light botanical scalp serum if your scalp tends to be very inflamed or yeast prone and doesn't tolerate oil well. The key is not to soak the scalp. You're not marinating your head like a salad. You're just softening the compacted material. Apply a small amount to the affected areas and massage it in gently. Then let it sit for 20 to 30 minutes before washing. You can also place a warm towel over the scalp for 5 to 10 minutes to help loosen everything further. That simple step alone can make cleansing much more effective. The second step is proper scalp massage. Now, this is not random rubbing. A useful scalp massage is about moving the scalp tissue itself. Use the pads of your fingers, not your nails, and gently shift the scalp in small circles. Focus on areas that feel tight, dense, or congested, like the crown, hairline, or top of the scalp. Do this for about 5 minutes a day. This can help improve circulation, reduce tissue tightness, mobilize the skin, and encourage better flow around the follicles. But more pressure is not better. If you massage aggressively and leave your scalp red and sore, you're not helping, you're irritating. So think mobilization, not punishment. The third step is gentle exfoliation. And this is where a lot of people finally start making progress. If the buildup is made of oil plus dead skin plus compacted residue, then you need something that can help dissolve and release that material. This is where ingredients like salicylic acid can be very useful. Salicylic acid is oil soluble, which means it can help break down oily buildup inside the follicular opening and on the scalp surface. That makes it very different from just scrubbing mechanically. Some people also do well with sulfur-based scalp treatments, enzyme exfoliants, or carefully formulated tea tree scalp products. The goal is not to burn the scalp or peel it raw. The goal is controlled exfoliation. Once or twice a week is often enough. And this is important. Do not confuse effective exfoliation with harsh abrasion. Abrasive scalp scrubs often create more inflammation than improvement. If your scalp is already tender, itchy, or inflamed, the last thing it needs is trauma. The fourth step is using the right shampoo. This is a bigger deal than most people realize. A lot of shampoos are either too weak to remove the buildup or so harsh that they strip the scalp and trigger rebound oil production. You want something that actually cleans the scalp while respecting the skin barrier. If you have oily buildup, scalp odor, greasy flakes, or chronic congestion, a clarifying or scalp balancing shampoo 1 to 2 times per week can be very useful. Then on other wash days, use something gentler. And if you suspect yeast overgrowth, dandruff, or seborrhea, dermatitis, rotating in an antifungal scalp wash can be extremely helpful. That can break the cycle of oil, yeast, inflammation, and flaking. Here's another mistake people make. They shampoo their hair, not their scalp. That's backwards. The hair strands don't produce the oil. The scalp does. So when you wash, focus on getting the cleanser onto the scalp skin itself. Use your fingertips and work it in thoroughly for at least 60 seconds before rinsing, not 10 seconds. Actually clean the scalp and then rinse extremely well, because leftover shampoo, conditioner, dry shampoo, leave-in products, oils, and styling residue can all contribute to the same problem you're trying to solve. The fifth step is stop overloading the scalp with buildup causing products. This is a huge hidden issue. A lot of people are layering dry shampoo, texturizing spray, leave-in serums, hair fibers, pomades, waxes, silicone-based products, and scalp oils on top of a scalp that is already congested. That is like spraying furniture polish on a clogged drain. It may make things look better for a minute, but underneath, you're making the problem worse. If your scalp is dealing with hardened oil buildup, you need a reset. That means minimizing anything heavy, sticky, waxy, or coating directly on the scalp. Use products more strategically and keep the focus on scalp health first. The sixth step is support the scalp from the inside. And this is where a lot of people want to skip ahead, but honestly, this matters just as much as what you put on the scalp. Because if your internal environment is inflammatory, unstable, or nutrient poor, your scalp will often reflect that. One of the biggest things to look at is blood sugar and insulin. Chronically high insulin can influence oil production, inflammation, and androgen activity. If you're constantly snacking, consuming refined carbs, sugary drinks, and ultra-processed foods, you are feeding a hormonal and inflammatory pattern that can absolutely worsen scalp oil imbalance. That doesn't mean you need to do something extreme, but reducing sugar, cutting back on junk food, and eating more whole foods can make a surprisingly noticeable difference in scalp health. The next thing is protein. Hair is prima, wryly made of keratin, which is a protein. If your protein intake is low, hair quality often suffers. The scalp also needs adequate protein to repair and maintain healthy tissue. Then there's zinc. Zinc is one of the most important minerals for scalp health. It supports immune balance, skin repair, oil gland regulation, and tissue healing. Low zinc can show up as poor skin quality, increased oil imbalance, slower recovery, and sometimes increased shedding. Vitamin A also matters because it helps regulate epithelial tissue, including the skin and follicular lining. But this is one of those nutrients where balance matters. Too little can be a problem, but too much from supplements can also cause hair issues. Omega-3 fats are very helpful for reducing inflammatory signaling, and B vitamins are important for stress resilience, skin turnover, and cellular energy. Now, I want to mention something else that is incredibly overlooked. Scalp buildup often gets worse when people are under chronic stress. Why? Because stress can increase inflammation, alter immune function, affect sebum production, worsen scalp tension, and impair blood sugar control all at once. So, if your scalp is flaring, greasy, itchy, or shedding more during periods of high stress, that is not your imagination. Your nervous system and your scalp are not separate. That's why some people notice improvement when they sleep better, lower stress, and reduce tension in the neck, jaw, and upper shoulders. And yes, posture can matter too. If you're constantly hunched forward, clenching your jaw, carrying neck tension, and reducing mobility through the upper body, you're not exactly creating the best circulation dynamics for the scalp. Is posture alone the answer? No. But can it be part of the bigger picture? Absolutely. Now let's talk about one very common mistake that keeps people stuck. They think if the scalp is oily, they should dry it out as much as possible. That sounds logical, but it often backfires. If you strip the scalp too aggressively, the sebaceous glands can respond by producing even more oil. Then you're trapped in this cycle of stripping, rebound oil, clogging, irritation, and more buildup. So again, the goal is not zero oil. The goal is normal oil, healthy sebum in the right amount is protective. It's only when it becomes thick, oxidized, inflamed, and trapped that it becomes a problem. That distinction matters a lot. Now, I want to give you a practical weekly routine that can really help if this sounds like what you're dealing with. Here's a simple approach. 2 or 3 times a week, before washing, apply a light pre-wash scalp softening treatment to the areas that feel congested. Leave it on for 20 to 30 minutes. Then wash with a scalp focus cleanser and actually massage the scalp for at least 60 seconds. Once or twice a week, use a gentle exfoliating scalp treatment designed to break down oily buildup and dead skin. Every day, spend about 5 minutes doing gentle scalp mobility massage. Avoid putting heavy oils, waxes, or coating products directly on the scalp. Reduce sugar and ultra-processed foods. Increase protein and support nutrients like zinc and omega-3s through food or carefully selected supplementation if needed, and be consistent for several weeks before judging results. Because this is another mistake. People try something for 4 days and then decide it didn't work. Scalp restoration takes consistency, and hair changes take even longer. Hair grows slowly. So the first signs of progress are usually not dramatic regrowth. The first signs are less itching, less scalp tenderness, less greasy residue, less visible buildup, less flaking. Cleaner scalp after washing. Scalp that feels more mobile and lazy is tight. And sometimes small soft hairs beginning to show in areas that used to feel congested. Those are all very good signs. That means the environment is improving. And once the environment improves, you've created a better foundation for the follicle to function. Now, I also want to be realistic. If you have significant androgenic hair loss, hormonal shifts, autoimmune issues, scarring alopecia, thyroid problems, severe deficiencies, or a chronic inflammatory scalp disorder, clearing hardened sebum alone is probably not going to solve everything. But if you ignore the scalp environment completely, you may be making every other strategy less effective. And that's really the takeaway here. A healthy follicle needs more than stimulation. It needs access. It needs oxygen. It needs oxygen. It needs a clean opening. It needs a calm environment. It needs less obstruction and less inflammation. Sometimes the scalp does not need more random products. Sometimes it needs less congestion. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do for hair emergence is not to keep adding more things, but to remove what's blocking the hair in the first place. And that's why this matters so much. Because when you soften the hardened oil, reduce the buildup, calm the inflammation, improve circulation, and support the scalp from the inside, you're no longer just chasing hair growth. You're restoring the conditions that allow healthy hair to come through. And that's a completely different strategy. If you've been trying everything for your hair, but you've never really addressed scalp congestion, hardened sebum, and follicle blockage, this may be one of the missing pieces. Not the only piece, but definitely one worth taking seriously. And once you start thinking about hair recovery as a scalp environment issue, instead of just a hair problem, a lot of things begin to make much more sense.